Dan Feferman is the chairman of Sharaka and a Middle East expert and analyst. And I'm Maayan Hoffman, ILTV News executive editor. Welcome back to the ILTV News Podcast. Thank you to our viewers and listeners. And welcome to you, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you spent a lot of time in the Gulf countries. In fact, you were just there very recently, and you mentioned the very stark contrast that you see between what goes on in Abu Dhabi and what goes on in, let's say, Gaza, where you have builders, a country that builds, and here you have an enclave that destroys. So tell me, what do you think it would take for more of the Arab world to embrace the Emirati model versus what we see going on in the extremism in Gaza and other places in the region?
Yeah, my various trips to the Gulf, I think this was my 14th or 15th trip. I stopped counting at some point. And there was a lovely, small but very nice civilizational and tolerance dialogue put on by the Emirati government and with people from literally all over the world. And what was notable wasn't anything remarkable said in the conference. I think it was the actual conference itself. And I happened to be accompanying a group of young, up-and-coming Israeli leaders, mostly right-wing, many of whom served in Gaza recently in Miluim, in reserve duty. And they kept, as we're walking around the streets of Abu Dhabi, which is much less touristy and famous than the streets of Dubai, for example, they said, oh, this looks just like Gaza, except. And I noted this in a recent article, you see people dressed as they want. So some people are dressed incredibly traditional and some people are very Western. You hear the call to prayer in malls, but you also see Western outlets selling lingerie in Western bookstores and next to Qurans. And you realize that there is this other alternative path that not only the Arab and Muslim world can take, but is taking. And the framework that I've developed over the last few years of dealing with the Palestinian issue, dealing with the Iranian access, but also looking at the Emiratis, looking at the Bahrainis, looking at the Moroccans, and looking where the Saudis are headed, is this framework of builders and destroyers, right? And it's a mindset. It's a civilizational mindset. By the way, part of the reason why I think we were so surprised on October 7th is that we are inherently a civilization, a society of builders. Mm-hmm. And Hamas, and I have to, I hate to say it, but by and large, Palestinian society has a destroyer mindset. They have shown time and again that they would rather see us hurt and destroyed rather than they built up and brought up. And it's only when you can change that mindset. Now, the Emiratis are an interesting case because I think they were never a society of destroyers. I think they were never radicalized. Trading societies, that's what they are. They're traders. They're a coastal country, have to be hyper-pragmatic from the start. However, the transformation that's fascinating that's taking place is in Saudi Arabia right now. And very quietly from the public eye over the last few years, you've seen this really transformation process of Islam itself and of the society. It's a long process. It's not an overnight one, but you see how to de-radicalize the population. And I think when the Arab world and the Western world needs to understand this paradigm and back it, pushes and helps transform Gazan society, Palestinian society, whatever you want to call it, from a destroyer society to a builder one, is when we're going to see actual progress and a shift in the paradigm of this conflict.
It's an interesting premise, the idea of builders, destroyers. I mean, now the Abraham Accords were an example, I think, of us being able to start building a little bit together. It's been 17 months of war. Tell me, are Israelis and the Gulf states still involved with each other? Do you see Israelis still engaging with these Arab countries, and in what ways?
Yeah, it's interesting. First of all, one of the concepts that I formulated from the beginning is that I think the Abraham Accords should be seen as a formulation of this block of builders, right? Like that. And throughout the entire time of the war, the governments never stopped having close and direct relations. I think it's one of the major achievements of these accords.
Sure.
The diplomatic, the intelligence, the security ties, but also the economic ties that were in place beforehand never stopped. And so the new economic statistics that recently came out show that the trade statistics continued apace. What we did see was obviously tourism, a major drop in tourism, and a major drop in new business ventures. And what's happening here is that in a place like the UAE, for example, 90% of the population are not locals. Mm-hmm. They're foreign workers. They're foreign workers, most of them from Muslim countries, and so they don't have the decades and decades of a tolerance, education, and culture that the Emiratis do, for example. Okay. In places like Bahrain, you have places where half the population are not necessarily on board with the agenda, and we can't ignore anywhere in the Arab world, anywhere in the Muslim world. I mean, even we saw it in the Western world, what the narrative war against Israel has done to people, what 75 years of demonization and vilification, what, Hamas's social media, if they succeeded in one aspect, it was on the social media battlefront where they fought and continue to wage a relentless and highly sophisticated war that continues to inflame opinion. And so a lot of things were taken, under the table. Let's not have things in the public eye, which is, again, why I think this conference was so interesting for me and why I decided to go, was because the Emiratis were signaling once again, okay, talking peace, people to people, not government, not strategic, but people to people peace, civilizational dialogue, interfaith dialogue is back on the table in a very open way. And that's what I think was interesting about this.
When Israelis interact with members of these countries, of our Abraham Accords countries, do you feel like their minds are open, that the mentality changes in some capacity? Because maybe here in Israel, I feel like sometimes these people don't interact. These people we people don't interact enough with even the Arab population locally, let alone in other countries.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to say. Is we don't as a society here in Israel, we don't fully understand the mindset shift in the Arab world. We don't fully understand the information sources they're getting and how they view things, and there are not enough frameworks for direct dialogue. One of the major breakthroughs that led to forming Sharaka, which I now co-chair, was this concept that we need to be talking and meeting to each other, and there aren't enough frameworks. The Arab world is incredibly cautious about this, understandably so. Even the places where it's legal to meet and engage with Israelis, you can be socially ostracized or bullied on social media, as many of the initial people who jumped into kind of this peace building and dialogue frameworks felt firsthand. A lot of the people that came on our delegations, had whether organic or inorganic and orchestrated, PR campaigns and pressure campaigns against them in their countries, whether in Morocco or in Bahrain.
And Sharaka was founded before the Abraham Accords.
Sharaka was founded right after the Abraham Accords.
After the Abraham Accords.
Right, to help popularize it, to help deepen the process that was starting to take place. But we realized, and anybody who's been in this field, but we realized quickly on, there's so much misinformation, disinformation, mostly against us, also a very big lack of understanding of us, of them. Mm-hmm. And then during the war, when you have, Al Jazeera doing what it does, even if it's banned in places like the UAE and others, you still get it on social media. Right. Lots and lots of accounts, media coming out of Iran and Turkey and other places. Of course. It's just hard to fight this ether that people swim in, even if their initial instinct was to support Israel or be sympathetic to Israel.
And, with Saudi Arabia, I think it's interesting because we've been hearing now for the last several years that Saudi Arabia, behind the scenes, as you said, they're modernizing in front of the scenes, but behind the scenes, part of that modernization is being able to work more with Israel, wanting to benefit from the startup nation and be able to work together and eventually to sign some kind of normalization. The war, we think, set us back, but they still seem to be expressing some desire, at least Trump seems to think so. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, especially given this whole idea of a Palestinian state. I mean, it seems, we don't know, Trump hasn't made any announcement, but it sounds or it feels like he's going to side on the side of, okay, we might let you even annex or enact sovereignty over areas A, B, C, or at least C, some kind of annexation in the Judea and Samaria areas. This, I would think, would ignite the people in the leaders of Saudi Arabia, against wanting to have normalization. But Trump is kind of doing it like it could work together. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, on a societal level, Saudi was a place that was, to some extent, radicalized, or certainly led and funded a lot of the radicalization efforts in the world.
Right.
So what they're doing on the religious level, the societal level, it's a big deal. And it is shaping things around the region. Something that we didn't really pay attention to here in Israel or in the West is there is sort of an Islamic reformation taking place in Saudi Arabia over the last few years, led by MBS, led by the Crown Prince MBS. And it's leading to very, very similar, maybe not on the grand scale of things, to what the Protestant Reformation accomplished, was privatizing religion, taking out maybe some of the stringencies in religious law as it pertains to the public sphere, and saying that's fine if you want to abide by these, but do it in your own home, do it and the state is not going to abide by these anymore. These are major and drastic changes. Keep in mind, Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the holiest sites of Islam. It's also the biggest bank account. And so it's really the leader of the Arab and Muslim world today. The Saudis definitely want to tap into Israeli tech. They are a rapidly modernizing society. You see a lot of Israeli business people with dual passports already flying there over the last year and over the last couple of years.
And the key of the dual passport, you can't go in as an Israeli, right? You can only go in as somebody non-Israeli unless you have special permission?
Right, but they're not hiding it anymore.
Oh, interesting.
They're not hiding. The people that I talk to who are flying regularly, and I think I might have to make a visit myself, are no longer hiding the fact that they're Israeli. There is a huge, huge desire for Israeli tech, not just tech, because tech you can buy anywhere. It's the innovative mindset. And that is something that's lacking in the Gulf. But I think there's a bigger issue at play here.
Okay.
And it's one of the reasons the Abraham Accords survived. And it's one of the reasons why I think the Saudis showed a clear readiness, willingness, and desire to come back to formulating ties with Israel. And that's after the misstep, or after the failure of October 7th, we showed, the IDF showed, an absolute and clear dominance over our enemies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, and said other way, over the Iranian axis. And so at a time, and one of the reasons why the Abraham Accords, I believe, came about was because the moderate Arab countries feel they cannot truly and strategically count on the United States to protect them when push comes to shove against the Iranian or other radical actors that may pop up here.
And yet they feel like they can trust us?
Because we have skin in the game. And so what happened was despite all of the public condemnations, which they have to do, I don't think they believe 80% of what they're saying.
They have to do it because the people was once radicalized.
Their people are not quite where the vision of the leadership is. But the second they saw, they needed us to absolutely dominate the Iranian-led axis. And the second they saw that not only could we do that, but we're willing to do that, this is a relationship that they need to have.
When you say that we are willing to do it, that we carried out, you're thinking of the retaliatory attacks of the last year and a half, or the work that we did before this war?
I'm talking about specifically showing that we know how to stand up to an Iranian-backed proxy, that we had the capability, I'm sure they knew, but also the willingness to go into Gaza and suffer the casualties we did, but demolish Hamas in the way we did, take out Hezbollah in the way that we took out Hezbollah so effectively, and strike Iran directly.
And so I'm assuming, we've talked, I think, about this before, but on October 7th, we didn't look so good. And so that might have harmed that. But in the last 17 months, you're thinking that the work that we've managed to do in the region has brought that back?
Absolutely, on the strategic level.
Interesting.
And so there's the tech side, there's the economic side, there's the military and strategic alliance that they are looking for, even if they can't quite say it out loud. What do they need on the Palestinian front? I think they can't abandon it completely.
Right.
But they are much more sober than where the Arab positions were. And again, we have to look, there's a big gap between what they have to say publicly versus, I think, where the private thinking is. I think they're incredibly pragmatic, and they're looking for ways to put this issue behind us. What they're going to be looking for from Israel is something that I think Israeli leaders need to be also approaching very practically, and that's some kind of commitment, at least on paper, to the idea or the future of some kind of Palestinian entity. I think they have no illusions that there will be a Palestinian state tomorrow. I think they have no illusions that the Palestinians themselves are capable of self-governance. And that's why, and I've got this in an article coming out now, we need to set an incredibly high bar of performance, of reform, of rule of law, of reining in incitement and terror payments, and anything we want. What is our dream wish list? short of saying there will never be a Palestinian state ever, ever, ever. And that is going to be an internal political debate that we have to have. I think we need to use this moment to get a lot of carrots and assurances from both the Americans, but also from the Arab world.
Right.
And we need to push them a little bit on this. But it will take that theoretical compromise on our part. Not necessarily a practical one at this point, but a theoretical one.
And so, in other words, to be able to give to them, here are the things we would, if this A, B, and C were taken care of, we would allow a Palestinian state, knowing probably that A, B, and C are not.
Call it a state, call it autonomy, call it something, call it an entity. I think we can play around with the ambiguity on that issue, and I think we should.
Yep.
But we as a society haven't really made that decision yet. And it's something that we need to take into consideration. And there's a lot of, I have a feeling that it's already happening. And if it's not, a lot of back channel negotiations that need to take place to put this the chess pieces into place.
Right. I mean, I would assume you're right that it's happening, given that Trump seems to be insinuating that we're going to sometime within the next 4 years have some kind of agreement. But it is going to be interesting, I think, to watch, to understand what will this Palestinian entity be. I mean, especially given the challenges of October 7th. And I mean, we're hearing all the time in the West Bank, in Jenin and Ramallah, et cetera, that they're really radicalized people there, and it's a hot front. So,
yeah, and in the West Bank, you have the challenge that the populations there didn't suffer the devastation that those in Gaza did. So they are not nearly as angry at Hamas as the people of Gaza are. But we have a chance here for a real reset. You have a president who is unpredictable.
Yes.
But he's also able to completely think outside the box and push pieces and leverage American power in ways that other presidents are not willing to do. And I think we need to start thinking also outside the box, start thinking big regionally. You have a chance here at a major regional reset. One of the problems we have, and if you look at what came out of the Gaza-Palestine conference that they had in the Arab League last week, they didn't mention Hamas once.
Yeah.
And the statements were almost entirely critical and blaming of Israel. I think we need to push for a real change in language also coming out of the Arab world. I think they need to stop hiding behind these slogans that they probably don't believe in.
Right.
And again, how do we leverage American power for that? How do we leverage Israeli power for that? Those are the questions we should be asking.
What role is Iran playing in all of this? We talk about Iran running the proxies, but what about its ties with Saudi Arabia?
Iran is currently and has been since 1979, or 1980, the big engine of anti-West, anti-moderate instability in the region. And it's going to continue to try to play that role. It's also the one thing that keeps it relevant on a regional scale. Now, any time you see any kind of rapprochement or any kind of détente or any kind of agreements with the Gulf states, those are very practical. I think the Gulf states, especially the Saudis, are under no illusion that Iran is all of a sudden some kind of moderate actor. However, both they and the Iranians are not countries that seek or even operate on the premise of open war. And so if they can figure out ways to de-escalate, they will. It's very pragmatic arrangements, very tactical arrangements that keep the specter of open war off the table. And to be honest, neither of them are very good. Not the Gulf Arabs nor the Iranians are very good. They're not trained to do open war kind of battle. So what you still have is a Cold War dynamic taking place across the region. I don't see that stopping anytime soon. The one thing that helps in that regard is the more Iran is economically weakened, as it is right now, the more Iran is shown to be a military paper tiger, as it was when we struck back after their last major missile attack, the more you have American pressure. It encourages the moderate Arabs to have this united front against Iran. And America, I think, needs to take an active role in shaping this Middle East that we want to see. For example, let's make sure the Iranians don't go back to Syria. This new Syria that we have, let's make sure that the moderate Arabs in America and the Europeans are helping shape something that looks like a moderate Syria. Let's make sure they don't come back to Lebanon. Let's make sure that Hezbollah doesn't reconstitute after it's been severely weakened. And you see something of a moderate anti-Hezbollah political scene taking shape there. Those are all the dynamics we need to encourage and pressure on Iran to discourage it from remixing and recausing trouble here in the region.
And just with regards to other regional partners, if Saudi Arabia would sign or get closer to signing a normalization agreement with us, is there any indication there'd be other Muslim majority countries in the region that might also be interested in this?
Yeah, my sense was actually prior to October 7th, we are on the verge of not just Saudi, but I've heard even double-digit number of countries ready at some point or another to sign relations with Israel. I personally am in touch with some of these countries, actually hosting a delegation now. I won't say from what country, but a large Muslim country that does not have ties with Israel. A very senior journalist delegation is visiting right now, and there are a number of countries that are interested. I think Saudi will be a linchpin. I think these 4 years of a Trump administration can be extremely helpful in that regard, offering, again, sticks and carrots. Right. If Sudan is able to solve its own internal problems, we can go back to that track. And so it's not, completely unrealistic to see multiple countries possibly warming or signing relations in some way or another with Israel over the next few years.
Well, you mentioned your delegation, and we can't maybe say where it's from, but you do bring a lot of very interesting delegations here. Tell me just a little bit before we wrap up about Sharaka and the kinds of delegations that you are bringing to the country.
Sure. So founded shortly after the signing of the Accords, initially with the Abraham Accords countries, we've kind of evolved into this platform of how do we educate, encourage, build ties about peace and normalization, interfaith dialogue that are short of the governmental. So we don't do governmental. We are non-governmental. We also don't really do the business side too much. And how do we get people who can have real change capacity in their societies, journalists, religious leaders, student leaders, civil society activists and artists, how do we engage with them in a meaningful way? How do we get them to come visit here and see for themselves and meet the different aspects of Israeli society? How do we, get Israelis to come to there if it's possible? If not, how do we get Israeli voices on the media or podcasts, of these countries, which we have succeeded to a large extent? And then, to accompany all that, we're trying to also change the perception in the West. And so, next week I'm going on taking a Sharaka delegation on a speaking tour in the Washington, D.C. area. Oh, cool. And we're trying to also change the international, especially in the West, the discourse on the Middle East, that the Abraham Accords should be the dominant framework for this new Middle East that we're all trying to shape. And
with that, with Sharaka, I'm not allowed to mention the delegation?
I prefer not, yeah.
Okay, fine. So, just tell me, is there anything else that you would want to add or anything else you think then that people should know that we didn't talk about or that you want a message that you want to share?
Yeah, I think the post-October 7th world has shown us that the big battle at hand here is really a battle of narratives. Mm-hmm. It's a battle of perceptions. It's a battle of echo chambers. And what makes it incredibly difficult, the circumstances we have feed these echo chambers and make it very hard to break through. You see it in all aspects of society. But regarding the Middle East, regarding political polarization, you have a lot of bad faith actors who are in it to cause polarization and trouble. You have, I mentioned Hamas and various Muslim Brotherhood and terrorist elements, Hezbollah, the Iranians, the Qataris, even the Russians and the Chinese are backing polarization efforts. And how do we break through that? How do we try to get to the people who I think most people are generally good and fair people in this world, and the news or increasingly the social media feed that's in front of their face is what they just happen to believe without giving it too much thought, right? Because the Middle East or foreign affairs is not their day job. And how do we break through that? How do we create these conversations? How do we get people in different societies or echo chambers to hear voices and conversations and thoughts from the other side? I think that's the big challenge of our day. It's also what I'm transitioning into trying to help with that. And so the more conversations, the more nuanced, enlightened conversations that we can have that break through these boundaries is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where our, at least you and I here in this kind of context, that's where our collective efforts should be.
100%. Well, Dan Feferman, thank you so much for being here today.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.